Hi, thank you for joining the fourth session of the Glassfibers Seminar Circle. My name is Jens Pfeifer, and I'm the host of this seminar about performance and materiality. With us today are four artists who I admire immensely, which makes it even more exciting for me to be part of this session. And I'm hoping and expecting that we're going to have some good information and hopefully fun in this session. I will slowly or shortly introduce Carly-Rose Bedford, Elad Fischer Leventon, Chua, and Karen Donnelllan. And in the coming few minutes, the artists will introduce themselves shortly, followed by the conversation on performance and materiality. Due to the limited time of the seminar, we decided to have only short introductions. So when I interrupt the speakers, it's only to save some time for the actual conversation, but hopefully everybody can time their presentations. You can use the chat for questions for the speakers, and please don't use it for personal remarks. And you can also do Q&A if possible, and I will find it and introduce it into the conversation. I hope you will have an entertaining and informative 90 minutes. And with that, I'll pass it on to Karen.
Hi everyone. I can't see who's here, so it's a little bit strange, and that I can only see the panelists. So if it's not, I mean, it's nice to see the hellos in the chats, and we're welcome, like Ian said, to pop any questions in, that it feels like there's people here. Yeah, I'm Karen. We're starting off we'll show you some of Ella's work.
Hi everyone. My name is Ella. I'm from Israel. I'm a student in B'Tzalel for ceramic and glass design. I'm currently in Germany. I'm doing a semester at the Burg. And in my work, I work a lot with my camera. I studied film since a really young age, and after high school, I went to the army, and I was a photographer in the army and a filmmaker. And I think it influenced a lot my work with glass and how am I seeing through the glass. And so the work that you see now, it's a research that I did about camera lenses. And I wanted to disturb the mechanism of the lens in reshaping the glass and distorting the picture within the lens and affect the mechanism in, yeah, it's not like the human eye sees, but as a statement of I'm a camera. I'm something that takes pictures, and it's like drawing the line between subjective and objective, and point on the tension between the subjective and the objective. And this is me. This is a video that I did, an installation that I did last year using the glass and the lenses that I made as a language. It's actually, I don't know if you can hear it, but there's like a Morse code in the background, and it's kind of like I made this Morse code with the visual and with the sound, and kind of like transferring something that I wanted to say. Yeah, so this is another work that I did. This was a video of 3.5 hours long that I had 3 screens, 3 different cameras who shot the whole event that was 3.5 hours in the glass workshop. The name of the work is Memorials, the Memorial Ceremony Day. It's this 3.5 work of us 3 girls working in the hot shop, making glass flowers and hang them on the wooden board. And so, yeah, it's like running for 3.5 hours and people coming and going, and it's just, it's not edited. And it's, yeah, this work is like really symbolic. I mean, it's really connects to where I come from Israel, and the Memorial Day is very big day in Israel. I mean, how we dress is really symbolic here, and the flower making, and it's the process of making here is also like really important. Like this whole process of 3.5 hours working in the hot shop, 3 girls. It's also like I chose those girls, and for like such a, also military is kind of like this really manhood work, and the hot shop is also like really manhood work. So for this performance, I chose to kind of make it upside down and like becoming this woman who makes glass flowers for the Memorial Day. Yeah, thank you guys.
Great, thank you. And now I think we have Sam Chua.
Yeah, so I'll be sharing a work which we will first watch the cut section of, the documentation of, and after I'll be showing screen caps from this documentation, which have been scanned and edited in black and white contrast as part of something I came back to recently, feelings of unsettling and chaos, escape and resistance. And this is the performance Glass Suckers, done with silicone masks at Serie about 2 years ago. And it's a performance I did with Hannah, Amelia, and Linda from the department.
Maybe I should just quickly say there's no sound in this video, so don't expect to hear anything. There's no sound with this one.
So in the performance, I think there's some questionably useful things to say to provide context. But in the end, you're still watching a video documentation. It becomes a performance object, and it becomes its own world of difference. And the shape of the mask that we're wearing and what it talks about when it meets the glass panels of the building, there's this idea of being unable to look away, to be suctioned to a surface and trailing a sort of distorted view. And our movements are practiced around the mask. The performance is built around putting it on, putting the situation on, looking through its funnel and becoming the reduced individual tied up in this interaction with the performance. And we start with small gestures. We're barefooted in March and it's really cold. Kneeling down and sort of shaking out your body, getting all psyched up and touched. And sort of like running the numbers through your head. Curling down onto the floor and breathing out mist. Sort of vaguely aware of the cues that you must pick up from the other person. And then we get to a point where there are louder gestures that sort of try to rupture and break through, break out of the vacuum that has kind of surrounded this act. Now, all of that could be very important, but also at the same time, we were looking at the video and now we're looking at these photographs. And it's kind of crazy because what happened then and what I'm seeing now when I look back at the documentation, how there's like the floor is kind of littered with cigarette butts and then there's dirt on our feet. And what this transitioning space outside the museum looks like around us, all this conversation that's happening and the sparse attention that is actually given to something to something as much of a spectacle as this. And what was, let's just go back to the pictures. Yeah. So what was happening on the other side of the glass as well made these strange pockets of interruption and invasion into each other's performing space. So the performing space of us, so outside, and that of the other people running around on the inside. And also the force of being slammed against the plane, because when I was the one pushing, and so it didn't occur to me how hard I was doing it, and how hard that looked like to everybody else, and how painful it felt. And also like so it kind of brought me out of that of that scenario, because the way that we had these masks that made to fit kind of really isolated your point of view, not just your point of view but your ability to interact with other people, yet from a very sensorial way, but not a tactile way. And I think sometimes there's a seriousness and a graveness when we kind of watch live performances. There's a certain distance that we push ourselves to border around performers. We see it as their intimacy, and we're just spectators. So we think we have to be quiet and watching, to pay attention and to attend, to perform as the audience, which seemingly is seen to be apart from ourselves, in order to adhere to this gathering crowd around the situation of the performance, the event of the performance. And it's a very unnatural way of behaving around a situation that is itself quite an anomaly. So for me, at least, I think when it comes to performance, there's a cloud of discomfort and disorientation that naturally surrounds it, that is in every utterance of it. And sometimes it's also an aspect that is employed consciously to someone who is performing. And I think sometimes when I am in the position of performing, I often feel that for everybody in that space, sharing that time and space, that we all are kind of set spinning, being brought out of place to a point of being unsettled, which I think is a very good thing, because then we're dislodged from a point of isolated familiarity. We're more conscious of others. We're responding to that awareness, and that response to others doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily something that is tied directly to our senses. So I think in my practice, performance is actually more of a practice of limits and looking at erasure or impending erasure of bodies. Because when we have performances and we keep the articles that were used in performances, for example, the mask, we keep articles, performance objects like this documentation, and we keep photographs, assemblages, and whatnot. We keep the marks of an event that has happened in the past. And in a way, it kind of brings, when you see them kind of set up in an exhibition, it kind of brings the ghosts or the specters of those bodies that have left and reanimates them through the objects, which is a very interesting kind of cross way to look at it, and where I'm kind of headed right now, I guess, with my writing, with my my other work. Yeah, so I think that's like roughly what I will be sharing.
That's great, Sam. Thank you so much. Yeah. And Carly-Rose Bedford.
How to start? So I guess to give a little bit of a backdate, I originally did most of my studies in performance. So I studied at the Royal College of the Arts in Melbourne and had a performance practice art practice for a good 8 years. That was really focused solely on the body. I was lucky enough to receive a scholarship from the Cultural Trust in Australia to go and sort of come to Europe and see performance work. And I was traveling around and I surveyed quite a lot of it, and it kind of was an interesting line that I began to trace, because in my work for that time, I became more and more interested in the idea of transference. And transference is like a psychology term, meaning when one body is able to silently communicate meaning to another. And so I became interested in my performance practices to how abstract could I make my performances, and how much could I put my bodies through a sort of sequence of experiences or events. Often they were quite difficult. I might put my body under a lot of duress. And I was interested in how could I become more precise in the abstraction of what people were seeing my body do in the transference of affect that I was wanting to communicate. So I was doing this, and then I came to Europe, and I just, the more personal my work became, the more awkward I felt my body was in it. And when I say personal, I don't necessarily mean it was narrative of my life or it was autobiographic, but I guess I just began to deal with kind of thematics that I felt directly affected me. A lot of those were drawn from queer theory. A lot of those began to touch on aspects of identity. And I just began to feel like, yeah, my body and bodies in general were really shutting down more than they could open up. So then I decided to go back into study. And I went into study with this idea of how could I take what I'd already known. So all my performances, like I said, were processional, and I would engage with various materials. And I kind of clocked that and went, well, how articulate can I become with the materials alone if I was to extract the body? And can I still keep up this idea of a transference of affect? And can I still kind of become more precise in creating these constellations or these installations that could begin to communicate abstract affects, essentially? So this is a work that I did for my graduation. So then I went to the Sandberg, and that's also where I met Jens. And I studied in materialization in art and design, and I committed to not perform for 2 years. So I was sort of became quite fixated on the fact that each material comes with its own kind of association. And this is what I ended up calling material performativity. So here, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So the previous work you saw was called Can't Tell If I'm Laughing or Grieving. And that was an installation where I built the architecture as well as the objects within it. This is a work called, so this was a room that I built. And this is like, I think 10 kilos of confetti, black confetti. And then there's an intro in the back where there's a rock that's sitting in black oil. And I was really interested in this material confusion and this kind of looping. So this kind of eternal loop that this work produced, especially this section, I was great. So often I go down and somebody had clearly stuck their finger in the oil thinking it was glass and then retracted and like sprayed oil all over the inside of that atrium. So it was kind of needed some work, and people would come out with like black, looking very kind of guilty. And this machine on the side is a confetti machine. So every now and again, it kind of drops this pathetic amount of confetti onto the pile. And the idea is that it's also kind of confusing and breaking this weird precious silence that this space creates. So this is a work, Soft Pink. This is where I worked with a 1.5 ton rock. And I spent 2 years working out how to make glass not look like glass. So it was working with this lumping technique. And I was, again, in this idea of like, we have a perception of a material, and materials generally have their own quality that we have a familiarization with. So what happens when we shift that? And what happens when you shift that and put it in contrast with something that's also as kind of stable and symbolically fixed as a rock? And what are these two things doing? So then this work was more, this is a sketch that I've done for a bigger work that I've yet to finish. And I began to really, so this was when I really departed from glass, and I did a residency in a bronze foundry. And then I became really interested in the fact that bronze just canonizes itself. It's a very kind of, what I would say, it has quite a strong patriarchal lineage. You know, we see these bronze figures and they're beautiful women, or it's also used to make these large monuments. And I wanted to make something really shitty out of it. So I took this plastic snake. I found the biggest plastic snake I could find, and I cast it, and I just had cast the top part. And then I was like, it just looks so good. So I stopped the process. But what I was interested in, it kind of proved my hunch. So this is going in what I call my affect library. So now I have an understanding that there is a value that we perceive in bronze that is able to kind of produce monuments. It has an importance that it kind of connotes. This is my most recent installation. So I've kind of given you a chop and change of my portfolio. That was called Utopian Redux, that happened at Tent, a solo show at Tent in the beginning of last year. And this work, this is, you can see I hand colored, what was it, like 8 tons of sand, something more, 15 tons of sand. So in the process of like working out this, I'm very, like, color is also, of course, very important. I think that's become evident. And I was interested in pushing this idea of a form and an undulating form, again, that it can be a body and it can also be a landscape and that it can also be a mass. It's kind of intimidating. It's a little bit difficult when you see these photographs because space is really important. And then I brought in different performers. So sometimes I bring other performers into my work now. I don't perform myself. And they kind of exist, what I say, it's like a very equal demographic plane. They have just as much importance in the work as the sculptural components, and they also have not that much more prioritization. So they're always, I always say, just they're disregarded in a way. And this is usually just to enliven the space and to also see what when you put a body in relationship with a sculpture that is intentionally performative, what tension begins to happen. And this is the traces, so having the performers in there and having the traces remain, so the space started very clear, and then eventually over time more detritus accrued and the space became much less kind of precious and less like a scenography. And slowly over time decayed. The water began to leak into the space, and which I really liked, because this work was kind of interrogating. It was the final work in a long canon of research that was kind of questioning how nature is co-opted to sort of affirm and reconfirm normativity, and what would it be like if that was sequestered, and if we chose to create a whole new iconography that could perhaps release us from these performative normative ideals that we project onto nature, and then in turn bring back on ourselves as natural behavior or normal behavior. There's a much longer research in that, but I won't go into it because it's it's not my panel. Is that enough today? Because I can go into it further, but maybe it's nice if we just have a discussion.
Save some for the questions. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Carly-Rose. And I'll introduce my work briefly. So I'm Karen Danlin. I did my undergrad at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin in Ireland, and my master's at the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. And now I am Associate Professor of Glass at Alfred University, New York, and Chair of the Sculpture and Dimensional Studies Division, and co-director of the National Casting Centre. So I've just picked out a selection of mostly fairly recent work. These pieces are called Silent Amplifiers, brackets Mutual Dreaming. So blown glass, iridized, and at the core, it's maybe hard to see here, but it's carved selenite, which is really common in Alfred, or around I should say Western New York, a type of crystal. My background, I guess, so overall my work maybe brings together glass and sound, and I'm also a Reiki master and work with other energy healing modalities, including sound healing, and so that's really integral to my practice as well, where I kind of think of my work as a healing technology, especially the sound, and so some works are suggestive of sound, some are literally sound. I'll show a little clip of a live sound performance as well. And this sculpture is called Fifth Dimensional Crystalline Solar Light Bodies. So I think a lot about how glass and sound can be suggestive of ether, and glass especially like of water. So sort of thinking about the intangible and how can we make these, like, you know, massive ideas, or like where spirituality meets science and quantum mechanics, how can we bring that down into an object or something that you can hold. So another detail from that work. This piece is called Tiny White Hole Universes, or Cosmic Hole. So it's carved marble and blown glass. This is kind of a detailed shot. You saw it under the table in one of the other images. But yeah. And then reflections from the silent amplifiers on the wall. So thinking about how like my work often bumps up against performance, or the way that I use glass in this sort of like performative way, like letting glass and encouraging glass to do the thing that it does best, like reflect or flow, or I think about like holding facture and stasis, the way which I think Carly-Rose might talk about in a similar way, in terms of like it being liquid and then it freezing, and it's still suggesting that other kind of material or state. And then so I've been working with sound for about 10 or 11 years, and often with a video, or in maybe a sound piece in the context of an installation, but I've also started doing live sound performances, kind of thinking about more direct engagement with people, and also like adding that layer of vulnerability where you're sharing frequencies very directly. And I've also been taking singing lessons for the last couple of years, so it might not be super evident here, but there's voice recordings in the sound work, and eventually maybe that will become live as well. We'll see. And so this piece, Arc, Wax and Wane, it's normally a sort of immersive 2-channel video work where it's the same video with one in reverse. And there's no sound with this. It also may come across a little glitchy because of Zoom. Again, it's on my website and that as well. And the only part that's digital is the sort of cleaning up of the edge, but it's essentially hot cast glass into plaster silica molds at just the right level of moisture and temperature so that you get these concentric circles. I also think about sacred geometry as a technology and the circle as an invocation of the divine feminine. So that's where like the circle theme comes in a lot. Beautiful. All right. So so I have some questions to get us started. I'm loving seeing the chat. keep us posted. Let us know how things are going there, and if you have any questions. So I guess my first question, generally, like given your presentations, we've kind of touched on the different ways that performance can be defined, like from maybe a more expansive definition to something more traditional. Would you each maybe just say a little about how you define it for your own practice? Maybe Ella, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, I'm working with glass and I'm working with photography and film, and I feel the combination between those two, like the glass as a material and also the camera as a tool, is very performative. Like there are two different materials or two different tools, but they're both like really performative. Glass, its own like this, also like working with them, like the qualities that you have, that it's liquid, but then it's frozen, but then glass is also like something that it's clear, we can see through it. And I mean, it's in every, like, it's everywhere. I mean, from the window to the lens in the camera, and it's kind of like invisible, but also it is visible, and we look at it and we look through it. Like, I don't know, like when we look through the window and we can see other windows through the window, or I'm looking right now at the camera and talking to you, and it's kind of like this see-through material, but it's also, it has his own presence. And I think the camera as well, it's like the combination between the glass and the camera are, it's very, I don't know, I'm working a lot with the camera, and I feel like the camera is a huge part of who I am and how I'm looking at the world, and how we're perceiving the world, and what is the reality through the camera. And I mean, in documentary movies, for example, there's this expression of like the fly on the wall. But I believe that like the camera can never be a fly on the wall. I mean, we're always aware that we have a camera in front of us, or like also in this era that we live in, it's everywhere. I mean, it's on our smartphones, it's on our computers, like we always aware that someone is kind of looking at us, or that the camera is present. And I think that today, like the performance with the camera is much more present. Also, like yeah, with, I don't know, selfies, you know, like people takes their own selfies, and it's like this really big popular movement, and it's like we want to be looked at, and it's kind of like selfies is kind of like their own performance. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like this two combination of materials, it's something that it makes it like really big statement of like, yeah, there's like this presence of the glass and this presence of the camera, that this combination between them makes it like a really interesting.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Carly-Rose or Sam, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the question was, sorry, I kind of might have forgotten. The question was, how does performance relate to our practice?
Or how, what are the ways that you do?
Right. No, because I don't think I actually started doing, I'm now studying at the Rietveld, right? Graduating this year. But I don't think before I came to the Rietveld, I actually did much performance at all. Or maybe I did some things, but I didn't call it performance. And I think a lot of that comes also from the fact that performance puts your body in a situation, and it kind of, your body faces is put against weight. It's some kind of force, borderings of some kind of social or self-capture, I think, whether it's about identity or race or gender. And I think maybe that was why I stayed away from it, or rather, I didn't want to get complicated in it. Yeah. But then I think I realized, like maybe around a year or two ago, that there was something about performance that I really, really enjoyed. And it was just being you with your body in a space. And you didn't need any much more than that. And I like the idea that it was actually very, very much enjoying the fact that I could just be in a place and be left to myself and but to my own devices and improvise out of that, based of what I had around me, come up with something, respond to something. And I think that was that was how it came, like performance came out to me as something that I should think about, I should write about. I think, yeah, there's also that cross section between writing and performance, or actually working in, because I first came from working in installation and sculpture, with a bit of a background in design. So it's almost the opposite or direction maybe of where Carly-Rose is coming from. And I think writing is now in my practice and in installation as well, and thinking about sculpture and objects, exhibition, curation and exhibition designs, thinking about space and thinking about narration, telling those stories, or those connections, and building those connections, and then kind of needing an outlet where your body is just allowed to go in and expand, without thinking of, okay, these are all the boundaries that I need to set out. These are all the lines of communication needs to be drawn. And I think somewhere in my practice, being my whatever extant practice there is, that somehow performance has kind of taken on this role of disarticulation, of breaking up or cutting up logic, but also breaking up and cutting up itself, my own body. So that I can disarticulate myself in order to change, or not disarticulate myself, but to kind of morph, to contort and be more responsive to the environment, to the people around me, to be more aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah, great, thanks.
I agree with you, Sam. I've come from the other side. It seems like it's not such a common trajectory, though, to go from performance and then move into formalism. I don't feel like I've got that many peers. I mentioned very briefly when I was kind of walking through my practice the term material performativity. if I'm asked to talk about performance, that's probably the thing that I will foreground, which is a notion or a philosophy that I've been working on now for, since I departed from literal performance. So I entered my studies with it and kind of came to it quite soon. And then I'm always endeavoring to kind of hone it and even understand what I mean by it. So it kind of came from a mashup of the idea of semiotics, you know, the sign and the signifier, and how these things produce each other, and also combined with the idea of a notion that Judith Butler coined, which is like gender performativity. So it's this whole concept that I was really wanting to dig into, to understand, like, how is it that we can create, you know, identity is created in relationship, but just as we are creating, you know, relationship with each other, we're also doing it with the world. So I was interested in how we are in this process of projection and meaning making on the materials around us as much as we are with each other. And so I think that that's always what I'm laboring at. How can I co-opt something, a material, and the way that we have kind of acclimated to its use, and therefore all of the value projections that we place on top of it, how much labor's gone into it, how precious or disposable do we think that thing is, and then I can kind of co-opt that into constellations of materials that can perhaps augment your perception of something consciously or unconsciously. I'm also interested in this kind of performative aspect. And the other degree of performativity or performance, like I stopped performing directly, but the work that I make is massive these days. So a lot of the time I'm wrangling with materials, you know, and a lot of the time I get told what I want to do is not the conventional way of doing things or possible. And that's part of why I'm choosing to do it, of course, to take something and see how I can mishandle it or reappropriate it. So often the process of making my work feels very dramatic and performative. There's often like lots of fails and a huge team that needs to come on board now. So I see the fact that I continue to choose to make my work, it's a choice, you know. I feel like the labor that I used to do in my durational performances is kind of transferred to the back scene of me doing this labor that is about cracking a code. And I do feel for some reason still very attached to that process. I believe that it does leave a kind of residue. And because the work often is about deconstructing power or norms or perceptions that I believe are restrictive or confusing for me, there is also something in me working in the workshop or figuring this stuff out or getting injured or hurting myself or loving this material into what I need it to be that feels like a performance. But maybe it's just about the remainder of the labor that stays in there that I feel still attached to. Sometimes I'm looking at it and I'm like, this is like some sort of amazing choreography, but I don't feel like that's something that necessarily needs to be publicly shared.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for I see some questions coming in. They're great, and also they're touching on some of the ones I was thinking of asking too. And Carly-Rose, a few of you have already sort of touched on it, but like then you started to talk about, you know, the performativity of the making process. Would you maybe expand on that a little bit? If that's relevant, if that feels like that's the thing you think about?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even mention my performance. Sorry, I just realized I should probably talk about the performance in my work. But I think that's important. They're not hierarchical, so I often forget about them. Not them as people, they're beautiful. But if I want to talk about the performativity of the workshop or the making, I think that there's still something, because I came from a performance background where I was kind of appropriating materials as I could find them. So it was often amassing a huge pile of things, which I think I'm still doing, but I was taking domestic objects and reusing them, or I was putting them in weird places so that they would kind of create a displaced feeling, but I didn't have a lot of control over actually what I was doing in a material sense. So it became more about amassing something than finessing something. And then I think that now that I kind of have realized, I mean, working now with material processes and casting and glass blowing and ceramics and concrete and all of the things and the bronze now that I get my hands in, I can't help but make a link often to the thematic of the work and then the kind of grunt that gets put into making it. And because I'm often also still misappropriating materials, or I'm always going, because I haven't classically trained in glass, I'm always asking, but can we do this? And how big can we make it? And how heavy can we go? And the fact that everybody kind of puts their back into it, and I'm now slowly, I feel really blessed to have amazing technicians or people that are technically skilled around me that are willing to kind of go there. You know, that's also something, like finding people that are like, I don't know if this is going to work and we're probably going to hurt ourselves, but let's see. And then this balance of precarity and failure and success and always teetering on the edge of like, is this going to work? I think creates something very beautiful. And I just maybe admire it as a phenomena. And then, yeah, I see that's, I don't necessarily feel that it's something that I need to explicitly share, but I do feel that that kind of coalescing of wills does end up in the work somehow, because there's often, yeah, just that. I can't do this work alone. I have to work with people. You get close to one another. You feed each other. You know, you sweat. You get all into each other, and I really. Yeah, it's very intimate. I really enjoy that. And I have a lot of gratitude also whenever we do succeed over the multiple failures that we usually have to have.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. Like how we do the work is the work.
Yeah.
What comes at the other end. Yeah. And Sam and Ella, I feel like it's maybe more literal for you, especially thinking about like the hot shop making the flowers that you showed us. Is there anything else you'd want to add to that in terms of the making process being performative? Or Sam?
I don't know. Yeah, I feel that in my case it's kind of more clear, because also, yeah, I mean, also like me behind the camera, but also in front of the camera, as me as the artist behind the film or the movie. It's also like this reaction that I'm also behind the camera. So I have the interaction with the camera, but I'm also in front of the camera, and I also give my point of view of myself, kind of. So I think that I mean, the interactions and the camera that stands between it's like the camera is the performance, kind of. And I think that the process is also the performance, but also the result, you know, like in the end I have the film, I have like a video, and today is a file that I have in my computer in the end.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ella.
Maybe I can jump in because there are quite a few questions, and here's one from Fiona who says hi, and she says it was interesting when Sam talked about watching back, and then Karen spoke about the vulnerability of live performance. I wonder how important the live event is for each of you. Is that the work and rest just document, or do you think of both as part of the artwork? This is especially, I think this is for all of you, but especially for Sam and Karen this time.
Sam, do you want to go first? No? Okay.
You can go.
Yeah, I feel like me being there really transforms things, and even just given their reactions or experiences of people, while they're, what there's something completely different when you're live in the space. And I find that often people are surprised by how, say in my case, like in particular, I'm thinking about the live sound performances, where people are often kind of taken aback by how much it actually impacts them, whereas you would rarely get the same maybe feedback or experience from someone watching a video. But that's particular maybe to me and to sound, that it's not necessarily a visual, so the documentation is never going to be as maybe exciting.
Yeah, I think I don't assign it a hierarchy. I don't say like, the performance is more important than the documentation, so it's not just the document. And yeah, they're pretty much, all of it is an iteration. Even objects they perform, they have that ability. I think we talked about it with Carly-Rose as well, about materiality of certain objects, and about the size and scale, and how that impacts the feeling of a larger object, a larger sculptural installation, and how that reacts onto your body and how that responds to your physicality. But I do enjoy a live performance more because, I mean, I'm an artwork. I don't mean to say that like literally, but your involvement, your mistakes, your improvisation comes into what turns out as the work, for me at least. That's important that I'm in there, because because the performance becomes an opportunity, an event that allows me to stand in front of all these things that I'm trying to say with this collection of objects, this collection of people, this location, this site, and if I can, and I can do that through my gestures, through how I've chosen to conduct the space, or respond to it. And I think, yeah, that's at least what it means for me. So I think, I don't know, like, I do see them as quite separate events. And also to take the photographs of take screen caps and turn them into photographs as part of an extension of the work and an extension of thinking about them. It's also something that carries on in writing afterwards. So yeah, it's an unending cycle. You don't know when it ends with performance. That it can go on and branch out quite, freely.
Thank you.
And I think there was also another question asking. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, there are many questions actually. I'm going to take this to actually make a bridge to the next one, because what you're saying is sort of touching upon like the performativity of yourself as a person, as the artist, but also like I think Carly-Rose made clear that in her work, like the person, the people, the performer or the performers, they are on the same level. They have the same value as their material. So there, and the material, the vast amount of material in that installation that you've shown us, Carly-Rose, there's a question about like, how do you dispose of your installation materials? Given that your work engages a large amount of materials and that we live in the time of the Anthropocene, how do you dispose of it? Or is it a significant consideration of the work? A very practical question, I think, but quite.
Yeah, but an awesome one. I think that the art world in general should be held accountable to its consumption of materials, or at least the kind of disposability of how, installations and art fairs and, temporal kind of artworks all end up using vast amounts of materials that cost a huge amount of money, and then it all goes in the bin behind the gallery at the end of it. I work very diligently to make sure that that doesn't happen. I don't necessarily, I also source, I'm aware that there is a paradox in me making work about nature and then using resources. This is something that I'm constantly grappling with. I think there's a lot of paradoxes when we talk about nature, and there's a lot of paradoxes in art making, and sometimes I don't know how to reconcile them. So I do my best. And I think what I do is, like, for the sand, I went to Limburg, and I went to somebody that is sustainably sourcing sand, and I created a relationship with them, and they actually gifted me that sand. And I gifted them back a small portion. So that sand is released. That sand is from the Netherlands, and it's been mined in it, like it's been, extracted in a sustainable way. It was very beautiful to go there. This like vast white mounds everywhere. And I also made sure that the pigment that I use is one that is non-toxic, and I do it all by hand. So I could have sent. Again, I think that was sort of an important part of my job. Underneath that support, underneath the sand, there's a support, and I made sure that all of that was also resourced to people that needed it. And it's something that I generally like to consider. A lot of the time I also use borrowed things. So I like sometimes that works that I'm using, or materials that I'm using, or things that feature in the work are kind of only there temporarily, and then they go back. So a lot of the rock, for example, I don't own, and it didn't feel important to own. And I think having a conversation around the fact that these things come together and then disperse, and the pink sand, look, that work will be reshown, so it's in storage. How I continue to store this large amount of things as they continue to build up and accrue that don't find their place somewhere else is a bigger question. But I'm grateful for you to ask, because I think a lot of the time this is also an elephant in the room right now.
Thank you. Karen, shall I just go on to the next question, or do you want to?
Yeah, let's do that. I have a couple more, but yeah, let's do that.
Here's one for Ella. So in creating your Morse code works with the reflecting mirrors in public space, do you have unintended interventions from the public that you find useful in the creating provocations and the editorial aspect of the work?
So the installation that I did with the Morse code, I used tons of materials that I filmed. Most of them, are actually like all the mirrors are mirrors that I found on the street, or lots of surveillance cameras. And the footage is lots of the images is images that I came across, kind of, but not in, like, the Morse code is actually a text that I wrote, and I converted it to a Morse code. So every beginning of the sentence, I used my lenses to film a window from the inside out. So it's kind of like really a reflection of a reflection. And so all this work is about like this peak hole for this really closed feeling, kind of. So, I mean, so all the objects that I found in the street, and like lots of the footages are also like I photographed myself in driving a car or in driving a train. And I mean, it's a big part of this work, this interaction that I have in those spaces, in those public spaces, and in the street, but it's kind of like me closed in this square that I made, kind of. it's kind of like the frame is closing on the self, kind of on the reflective self. I hope that it's answered the questions.
Oh yeah, sorry, Karen. Do you want to take it further?
In terms of responding?
Yeah, or in terms of because
well, I don't know if it feels like that as relevant to my practice maybe, but possibly more for Sam and Carly-Rose in terms of interaction in that.
I think I have something to say. I mean, in relation to what Ella shared about the frame kind of closing in on herself. And maybe back also at the same time, we can answer one of these questions in the chat that talks, I think someone was asking, how do you navigate the artifacts and documentation of the performance when showing my work? And yeah, like talking about documentation, we always have that little box, the box of the photograph, the box of the video, or the box of the room that holds the exhibition or the performance detritus. And I think, yeah, like a lot can happen within that box. It's not necessarily like necessarily a capture or a closing off of things. But I think, okay, maybe when it comes to performance, I'm still at the stage where I'm a bit of a purist about it. So I like live performances, and I think I will, and I kind of like them more as something that I only want to do, live performances, and not to think so much about what comes out of there or what or how to keep those documents so important, or to hold them so closely. Yeah, because I think for me, having that experience with the body outside of a fixed frame that kind of extends endlessly, and this is also the thing I was thinking about with erasure, that a performance always moves towards its end. And that at that point, the bodies leave, the performers leave, audience leaves, and then we get these objects that stand by themselves, and in a way have no companionship. I think about it in that way, at least, that they're kind of alone, they're kind of isolated now, without responding bodies or other things to hold, without us to hold them. And I think I'm still working through this idea of what that means, what that can mean in terms of some theory of performance. But it's just yeah, like a bit of a loss, I think, that it seems to that performance seems to set itself up for, that it moves towards this direction. Yeah, but I don't know if I really answered the question, or yeah, maybe.
I think that's great. I wanted to ask about humor in your work and how any of you feel about that. I feel like there's humor in some of the work, but maybe that's like not a subject anybody wants to address, or it could be like offensive to people. It's something I really appreciate in work, like intentional or unintentional.
Yeah, I kind of want to know where you saw it. Because like, yeah, where did you see it?
Well, I think about even with Sam's performance of banging off the window and falling over, like, and trying to imagine myself too in that space in the museum, and there's this thing happening over here, that I imagine my reaction might be to laugh or feel like, and it's also that nervous laughter too, where there's this anomaly in the space. And I think about in yours, Carly-Rose, like, even like the playfulness, like the colors, the juiciness, that there's like this, just this sort of like at least the suggestion of playfulness. But I haven't experienced your work in person live, so I can't speak to that. But
I mean, I think it's great when people see humor in my work or in art in general. There's something of a kind of brat in me sometimes when I feel like things get a little bit too earnest, especially in performance, maybe because I trained in it and I kind of reached a saturation point where I like to, it's a little bit like acknowledging the gaze. You know, it's kind of like making these very sensitive spaces, but then also kind of also breaking them. And this tension between the two, I think, is really important. And I also, my work is this phase of work, which it's now, I think, transforming into something else with this new research that I'm doing. But this was especially around ideas of nature and naturalness. Because of my suspicion of that, the work just became, it does have a kind of very conscious degree of camp in it. You know, that using these colors that do have some degree of frivolity. And I love it when people also don't quite know what they're seeing and they want to touch it, or when something feels a bit too much. I mean, I always tell my performers as well, like, feel free, feel comfortable. And sometimes in that as well, it means that they're trained dancers or they're trained performers and they're rolling around. Like you can see, I don't prompt them often. I give them sights of where they're going to perform. So in the pink sand, they ended up like rolling around and stuffing it in each other's mouths and eventually in each other's kind of all down and then spooned, you know, and in that sense, it is kind of a ridiculous act. But it's also bringing that tension of the fact that I think humor cuts through a degree of earnestness that's important to make us reflect. Not always, but it is an important device sometimes. And I think as artists, it's also important that we can kind of laugh at ourselves. You know, the whole thing's part of the cosmic joke. And I try to kind of keep that a little bit present in the work.
Yeah, I agree. Like even it can be a whole other level of engagement. And also like you speak about kind of breaking down the hierarchies, or I think about the white cube gallery and everything that implies. All of that can kind of cut through some of it. Or even how you feel like you're supposed to act in a gallery.
Exactly.
You know, the performance of just being a viewer.
And that's a material, you know, that's something that you can actively engage with. And I think it is also because sometimes the work has a degree of urgency, or some of the work has had a kind of political undertone to I feel like adding a degree of humor takes the earnestness away from the topic of somebody that maybe hasn't experienced that and subverts it to a gift for the people that I'm speaking to. We're also allowed to laugh or have reverie inside discussions that are maybe about degrees of oppression or duress. So I think that that's also kind of something that I find relief in. So I like to put that as a wink, within the work.
Yeah, great, thank you. Sam or Ella, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah. Okay. I know. I mean, before what you said about laughing, and I think that becomes a very natural response to just diffusing the tension of a situation. So somehow your body recognizes, maybe even before your consciousness does, that that a performance, when you come and gather around it, it's a very disorientating and distorted experience. So it's strange, and there's just like there's no way that you don't know how to prepare yourself to react to something like that. And a lot of the times, then the only way to kind of normalize the situation is to kind of be serious, or you know, to feel like you have to respect this person, respect this space, respect these performers, and then you stand at a distance, and it becomes very hard to be comfortable as a viewer of performance. I don't know, I was like thinking about it. I think I was mentioning as well before about how like there's a when you talk about the way to perform as an audience, and this like hyper awareness that you get of being in a space and not knowing how to conduct and not belonging to it. So because you're not a performer, you don't in a way you're not prepared to adhere to the situation. You're not prepared to. Sorry, I just saw the text. Yeah, and so I feel that like when we are sharing the space together, and especially when it comes as a live performance, there is that cohesion that we're all telling them, okay, you know, you don't have to be so on the edge. There is, if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel discomforted, unsettled in a way, it's fine to be like that, because this performance is meant to do that to you. Performances are meant to act in that way, and I think even before we realize that it's happening, that sometimes we put it like Carly-Rose said, it becomes a material you employ in what you do because you want to elicit a certain kind of reaction. You want people to be destabilized. You want people to laugh away these the themes, the heaviness and the weight of what you're carrying, whether it's materially or conceptually.
Awesome. Thanks, Jens.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to sort of get to an end, but I would also want to give Ella like a chance to react on this, and then maybe we have to round it up, unfortunately.
Yeah, so humor in my work. I mean, I think that most of my work are not really dealing with humor subjects, kind of. But I don't know. I mean, the video of the 3.5 hours of the Memorial Day ceremony. So it's me and 2 girls working at the hot workshop. So I mean, at the beginning, I remember that at the first, I don't know, hour, it was like 3.5 hours nonstop working. So at the first hour, we were like, really, we need to be serious. Like, you know, we're dealing like with, we're doing kind of like a memorial ceremony. So, but at some point, it kind of break. I mean, I had this glass shattered into my back, like this hot glass, and you see me like for 5 minutes trying to get the glass out of my shirt, and it's kind of like funny, but like, so also like the interaction between us 3. So it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, it gets you, like, I don't know, it has his own humor, kind of like, especially people who work at the hot shop and know how it goes, and some like one flower breaks and you start to make another one, and like it's not going but it's going, so it has its own humor kind of during the movie. So and also I think that the work with the lenses, so it's kind of like this playfulness, you know, like I decided to distort the reality, and I decided that I want to play like with I don't know, like the image of myself, and it's kind of like going into like a mirror, how like this mirror playfulness, and so yeah, I think it has humor inside, but it's not direct, kind of, it's kind of like around the corner somewhere.
Oh, great. Thanks, Elad. Yeah. So Jens, is there any burning questions? I've actually just seen that there's 2 sections of questions, so I haven't been able to keep track of everything.
Well, we have answered most of them, but unfortunately, we have to leave some questions open. Sorry to everybody. But I mean, as usual, these seminars or these meetings can only scratch the surface. And we're just hoping very much that this gives you more food for thoughts and brings a new or a different angle into your own practice or into your teaching. And I would very much suggest that if you really have burning questions, you just come back to us and we'll divide it and spread it to the ones you're addressing. And I'm sure that everybody is willing to answer whatever question you've got.
Yep.
Pardon?
Yes, I definitely am. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to thank all the panelists, of course. I want to thank our audience. Thanks for joining us. And as usual, this is an awkward platform and I just can't get used to it, but trying to make the best of it. So the recording of this can be seen on YouTube channel in about 10 days. So if you want to share this with other people, with your students or peers, you're welcome to do so. Next month, we will host our last session of the seminar series for this year, or no, not for this year, of this series. And we are about to design a new series. And I would really very much like to ask everybody to give us your feedback. With your critique and your feedback, we can make this series even better. And who knows, maybe change it in a way that gives even more people a chance to be part of it. We don't know yet when we'll have the next series, but hopefully it'll start soon. One good news is that we were asked to also have a seminar series or sort of seminar for the Glass Art Society conference in May. So you'll see us there, or maybe even before that. Thanks again, Ella, Carly-Rose, Sam, Karen, of course, and everybody else.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.